The hockey world hasn't produced a more fascinating character than WHA and NHL goaltender Gilles Loony Gratton. Gratton never really wanted to be a professional goalie. He wanted to be a Tibetan monk, and he'd eventually quit hockey to seek enlightenment. But Gratton's path from playing big league hockey to finding spiritual wisdom was a raucous one, marked by sex, drugs, and rock and roll, overshadowing his unique talent that made him one of hockey's most promising young goaltenders. Here's the story of the man behind the iconic goalie mask, the eccentric oddball who hated hockey, but became one of the game's most memorable characters.
Gilles Gratton was from another planet. I mean, he was the most bizarre person I've ever seen.
Gilles Gratton was born on July 28, 1952 in Montreal, one of 5 children of Fernand and Therese Gratton. His older brother Norm would eventually play in the NHL for several teams over 5 seasons. Gilles became a goaltender when his Pee-wee team's goalie, Dan Bouchard, yes, that Dan Bouchard, was promoted to the Bantam team and the team needed a goalie. So they chose the smallest player, which happened to be Gilles, to replace him. To that point, Gilles had never played the position. Gilles was a standout through Bantam and midget hockey and eventually moved on to Junior B in LaSalle, where he notably endured 2 severe concussions, both of which required hospitalization. These painful incidents soured Gilles on hockey. On the verge of quitting hockey for good, Gratton was enticed to continue when he received a surprise offer to play goal for the Oshawa Generals of the Ontario Hockey Association. Now, the Generals boasted several NHL stars such as Terry O'Reilly, Bob Hound Kelly, and George Ferguson, but the team struggled through the 69-70 and 70-71 seasons. Gratton played decently, but allowed 5 goals per game. The fortunes of the Generals and Gratton improved dramatically in 1971-72 as the team posted a 35, 18, and 10 record, with Gratton allowing 3.55 goals per game to earn his second All-Star team selection behind Michel Bunny Larocque of the Ottawa 67s. Gratton was drafted by the Buffalo Sabres in round 5 of the 1972 draft, and GM Punchy Imlach offered him $9,000 for 2 seasons, plus a $5,000 bonus and a sure ticket to the minor leagues. Luckily for Gratton, the fledgling World Hockey Association was now on the scene, and the Ottawa Nationals offered him $25,000 per year over 2 years and a $20,000 signing bonus. Gratton signed on with Ottawa to share goaltending duties with veteran Les Binkley. Aside from Binkley, Wayne Carlton, and Brian Conacher, the Nationals had little NHL experience, but were a hard-working collection of minor leaguers and recent juniors. The 20-year-old Gratton had a stellar rookie season, posting a 25-22-3 record and a solid 3.71 goals against average. Gratton and Binkley were particularly strong in a 4-game playoff loss versus the eventual champion New England Whalers. In Game 2, Gratton stopped 52 shots, but the overmatched Nationals lost in overtime. The Nationals franchise officially moved to Toronto for the 73-74 season and became the Toronto Toros under the ownership of John Bassett. Gratton posted another strong season with a 3.53 goals against average in 57 games. At midseason, he replaced injured Al Smith in the WHA All-Star game in Minnesota. The Toros finished second in the East Division and defeated the Cleveland Crusaders in round 1, but lost to the upstart Chicago Cougars in the semifinals. Perhaps Gratton's most notable adventure during the season was skating around the practice rink naked, which may or may not have been the inspiration for a similar scene in the movie Slapshot. In the offseason, the Toros stunned the hockey world by signing NHL legends Frank Mahovlich and Paul Henderson, along with Czech defector Vaclav Nedomansky. With his contract up for renewal, Gratton took advantage of a bidding war between the Buffalo Sabres and the Toros, and eventually he'd signed a 5-year deal with Toronto at $101,000 per season, plus a $100,000 signing bonus. The Toros also threw in the use of a Porsche 911S Targa. At about this time, the outspoken Gratton was the subject of numerous media features. In a nationally syndicated interview with writer Roy McGregor, Gratton revealed that he had a great disdain for playing hockey. According to Gratton, quote, "My ambition is to never work. That's what hockey gives me. I'll play until I stack up enough money to float for the rest of my life. Then I'm gone. Man, gone. I'm a specialist of nowhere. Have no and want no responsibility. Hockey gives me free time and lots of money, but I hate it. I like to win, I admit that, but I hate the pain and I hate the stupidity. The last 2 years I felt like I should say the hell with it and go back home to Montreal. Sometimes I think, why am I in this rink getting pucks thrown at me when I could be home enjoying life?" Journalists also became curious about Gratton's passion for the types of things that were not typical among professional athletes, such as the fact that he was an accomplished piano player despite never taking a lesson, and he also played guitar in a band. Gilles was a believer in reincarnation. Gratton could describe in great detail events that he says happened to him in previous lives.
Well, the one in Germany, I was a doctor. I lived in the center of Germany. In Spain, I lived in the southern Spain, and I was in the army.
An avid practitioner of astrology, Gilles once refused to play goal because the moon was in the wrong place in the sky. And finally, transcendental meditation was central to Gilles' life, but he avoided it on game days for fear it would make him too passive. To his ex-teammates, Gilles remains a perplexing character.
Man, he had a different outlook of life, but maybe because he smoked a lot of different stuff over the years, but he really thought he'd been reincarnated.
Prior to the 74-75 season, Gratton reluctantly agreed to play for Team Canada 74 in the second 8-game Summit Series versus the Soviet Union. The team was composed of WHA players, and Gratton was slated to be the third goaltender behind Gerry Cheevers and Don Smokey McLeod. Gratton was asked to play Game 5 for an injured Gerry Cheevers, but he refused, due to his dislike of team director Wild Bill Hunter. Cheevers played through the injury and was outstanding anyway. After the first 4 games in Canada, and prior to arriving in the Soviet Union, Team Canada played exhibition games in Sweden and Finland. Gratton played 2/3 of a game in Finland and played well, but he made headlines as he appeared nude on the front page of a Finnish newspaper. Back in Canada, Gratton and the star-studded Toros enjoyed a solid 74-75 season, finishing second in the Canadian division with a 40-32-8 record. Gratton's enthusiasm soured at mid-season, however, when coach Billy Harris resigned due to personal reasons. Gratton was heartbroken as he and Harris were close. He felt even worse when an injured player, Bobby Leduc, was chosen to replace Harris as coach. Harris and Gratton had an understanding that was, in a nutshell, Gilles could do whatever he wanted because Harris feared he would quit if he tried to discipline him. Gratton came completely unglued in the playoff quarterfinal series versus the San Diego Mariners. Lamenting that he was physically and mentally unprepared to play, he was shelled for 5 goals in 2 periods in Game 1 and was replaced by Les Binkley for that game and the next 4. With the Toros down 2-3 in the series versus San Diego, Leduc asked Gratton about starting Game 6, and Gratton told him to, quote, "F off," and he wandered off to a local tavern and became inebriated. The day after being eliminated, Gratton skipped the year-end team photo, hopped on a plane to Florida, and was subsequently sued by the Toros for breach of contract, a contract which still had 4 years remaining. On July 3, 1975, the Buffalo Sabres traded Gratton's rights to the St. Louis Blues, who signed Gilles to a 6-year contract at $90,000 per season. The NHL draft was in Montreal that summer, and the Blues wanted Gilles to stop by and say hello. When he arrived, he bumped into an old acquaintance from Oshawa, Gary Young, who gleefully asked Gilles how he felt about joining the Blues. Gratton responded, quote, "I don't give an F as long as they pay me. Effing hockey. I hate it." A few minutes later, Gratton learned that Young had been named the head coach of the St. Louis Blues. So not surprisingly, Young and Gratton were at odds from the start. Gratton played just 6 games with the Blues and recorded a 2.49 goals against average and a 2-0-2 record, but he failed to finish 3 of those games, feigning injury. The breaking point came on November 20 in a game versus the New York Islanders. 5 minutes into the game, he was hit on the elbow by a Bob Nystrom shot. Gratton skated off the ice. A cold Eddie Johnston was forced to replace him and was shelled for 8 goals. Gratton was done with the Blues. On his way out of St. Louis, Gratton accused Young of being an anti-French Canadian racist. Gratton tried to return to the Toros, but the Blues retained his rights and refused to relinquish them. Moreover, his Toros teammates still resented him for deserting the team in the 1975 playoffs. There'd be no second act for Gratton in Toronto. So once again, he hopped in a car, headed to Florida to, quote, work on his music. He assumed his hockey career was over, but this was the 1970s, and the demand for goaltenders far exceeded the supply. Later that summer, New York Rangers GM John Ferguson offered Gratton a 3-year contract. Although he was woefully out of shape, he made the team as a backup to John Davidson. The Rangers were trying to recover from a horrendous 75-76 season, but were a dysfunctional mess in 76-77. For his part, Gratton showed his appreciation for Ferguson's lifeline by drinking heavily, smoking pot daily, and concocting numerous excuses to avoid playing.
John Ferguson would ask him to play, and he'd have some warped excuse.
When I played hockey, I kind of used it just to play with people's mind, you know, just to play with the coach's mind. I can't play because my moon is not in right alignment with the sun. And if you play me tonight, I'm going to let in about 15 goals. And he looked at me and says,
tomorrow when the full moon's gone, I'll be happy to be able to play type of thing. But he used to drive coaches nuts.
And he actually shared the fact that he was reincarnated as a hockey goalie from being an executioner in Barcelona, where he threw the rocks at the sinners, and that he had to meditate to eliminate that fear. Some games he would just get out of the way of the puck, thinking possibly that it was the rocks and he was getting back.
The team finished well out of the playoffs. Gratton's record was an unimpressive 11-18-7 with a 4.22 goals against average. Ferguson blasted Gratton's play as, quote, not NHL caliber. Despite Gratton's shoddy play, the 1976-77 season remains the most notable part of his legacy for his choice of goalie masks in an otherwise forgettable game versus the St. Louis Blues. He had gone through 5 masks that season, and then, on January 30, 1977, he gained lifelong infamy when he unveiled this iconic mask.
I was reading a National Geographic magazine, and I saw this tiger. I thought, wow, it would be neat if I could make a mask out of that. As the game was starting, I put my mask on, and you could hear the crowd would go like, ooh. Just like, wow, what's this, you know? And then the referee was looking at me, and they didn't start the game. They all skated down the ice to see me, the referees and even the St. Louis players. And they kind of look at my mask. They said, wow, man, that's really neat. And then they started the game.
Gratton's career would finally implode on March 10, 1977, when he refused to start a game versus the Boston Bruins because, quote, the stars didn't align properly. The Rangers were forced to play rookie Dave Tatarian in the game, and he allowed 6 goals in the first period. And he'd never play another NHL game. For that matter, Gratton's NHL career was about to end as well. At training camp in 1977, Gratton further alienated himself from Ferguson by calling him a liar in the press. He was promptly put on waivers, he went unclaimed, and was dispatched to play for the AHL New Haven Nighthawks. His stint in New Haven would consist of 1 game, the only minor league game he ever played, a 6-1 drubbing at the hands of the Binghamton Dusters. In a newspaper article soon after, he was quoted as referring to New Haven as a prison, but a well-paying prison. I'm happy to make money and do nothing, he said. They have to pay me. Gratton was suspended, and the Rangers eventually bought out his contract. At this point, Gratton's exit from hockey barely registered a blip. For the goalie who was compared to Ken Dryden just 2 years before, his career was finished and he'd soon be forgotten. He was just 25 years old. Gratton had some minor brushes with hockey throughout the years. He was a photographer at the World Ice Hockey Championships in the 90s in Vienna and Finland. He worked at classic auctions in Canada. And of course, He penned his memoirs for the entertaining book Gratton the Loony with author Greg Oliver. Writer Alan Abel once asked, is Gilles Gratton a harmless, amusing character or a disruptive force in the sport he once played so well? One thing is for certain, an outspoken free spirit like Gilles Gratton could have only played in the 1970s. Despite squandering his talent and alienating every team who hired him, he was always authentic, and for that, he is remembered fondly by his teammates. Looking back at that 1975 article with Roy McGregor, it's clear that Gratton began his career with a goal, and he achieved it. I hope when they lay me in my grave, there's someone there who can say Gratton never worked a day in his life. If someone can say that about me, then I'll have achieved what I set out to achieve. I've already worked out my marker. Here lies King Floater. Never worked a day in his life. But he was happy. Thanks for watching this episode of PHA TV. Please hit the subscribe button and never miss a classic hockey video.